When Arizona first became a territory in 1863, the only thing about it that was dry was its deserts. The state's first brewery was built just a few years later. As arid states go, Arizona was pretty wet.
Every town in Arizona, one of the first buildings built was usually a brewery. Basically, the water in each town was something that went bad. And beer is something that it had preservative qualities because of the hops and things, and they were able to keep beer longer periods of time. And so beer was something that was popular. Most of the breweries back then were brewery saloons where the brewery was in the back or something, and the saloon was the place that people came in and drank. There was a lot of unruliness that went on, gunfights and things like that because of people getting drunk. It was part of the saloon atmosphere.
Statehood arrived for Arizona on February 14, 1912. At that time, individual states, counties, and cities throughout the United States had the option of voting themselves dry, and many were. Statewide prohibition required an amendment to the Constitution.
Arizona came in with an amazing constitution, a very progressive constitution. Very democratic, like the progressive reform era of the time. It included initiative, referendum, the recall of judges, forbidding capital punishment. What I find interesting is that the First Amendment that gets passed was women's suffrage. That gets passed in 1912, and it's the passage of women's suffrage in 1912 that enables the Prohibition initiative to get on the ballot as well.
Armed with the new Constitution, local and national temperance workers rushed to enact a statewide ban on alcohol. A vote was held in November of 1914, years before the national referendum. Arizona became the 13th state to go dry on January 1, 1915, with perhaps unintended consequences.
When Prohibition was voted on in the state of Arizona, there was only 5 counties that voted for Prohibition. Now, there was enough of a majority to have it, but it was a slim majority.
The first Prohibition law that came in, the one that passed in 1914, was not a very well-written law. There turned out to be lots of loopholes. Not only did it not deal with the question of sacramental wine or use of alcohol for scientific purposes, it also said that you weren't allowed to introduce into Arizona alcohol. So what did that mean? Well, could you, for example, accept alcohol that someone else brought over the border, not an Arizona citizen? You didn't introduce it, so were you then liable? Hard to tell.
Just before January of 1915, every liquor store in at least Tucson was having a sale to get rid of everything that they had. Undoubtedly, the Catholic Church took advantage of that, buying up as much wine as they could. The self-proclaimed Prohibition expert in Arizona, a man by the name of Reinhardt, was famously quoted for saying that Catholics could use grape juice just like the rest of us. And that was not received very well.
Local Catholics, as well as scientists from the Desert Laboratory at the University of Arizona, soon scrambled to find alcohol to conserve their laboratory specimens and preserve parishioners' souls. A different enterprise in particular suffered the most.
Prohibition basically brought the brewing industry down its knees. Copper City Brewing Company chose to test the new law. And what they did is they found one of their agents to sell 1 bottle of beer at the stroke of midnight on January 1st, 1915, when Prohibition went into effect in Arizona. And immediately, John Merklin, which was the brewer, was arrested, and also the agent that sold the beer was arrested. Merklin was basically let go on his own recognizance, and the agent was basically put in a position where he had to fight to get out.
So there were lots of challenges in the law in 1914 and also in 1915 around these issues. So much so that by 1916, they had put another initiative on the ballot, so that the Prohibition came up again for the vote in 1916. And there, it got a bigger majority because it dealt with all of these other issues.
To many needing a legal drink, the closest place to go was south, to Mexico.
So Prohibition rules and regulations in Sonora varied over the years. And as new governors came in to Sonora, some governors came into Sonora and set up Prohibition in their state. The next one would come in and take it down. So it was always a changing game in Mexico. It wasn't always clear when you could go and get a drink there, but it was the place to try and find alcohol, and there was a new tourist market in certain parts of Sonora as a result of national prohibition in the U.S.
On January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution officially prohibited the manufacture, consumption, and transportation of alcohol throughout the nation. But the new law didn't necessarily change old behaviors.
People, of course, still drank in Arizona, despite the laws of prohibition, nationwide as well. Prohibition became to be seen as, for some people, as kind of like speed limits. We might think of speed limits today. They're the law, but probably a lot of people have broken that law.
Some of the negative side effects included the health factors involved. There was a lot of unseen factors, poisons used in making illegal booze, unsanitary conditions in containers. There was bootlegging, speakeasies, and everything else involved in it because of the illegal trade in making alcohol. And it basically, it also led to experimenting with drugs and other things that were not as popular before Prohibition. And alcohol is a social drink. And a lot of times when people do prohibit something, people will find ways to go around it.
Arizona's dry run came to an end in 1933. By a 3/4 majority, Arizona became the 21st state to vote for the nationwide repeal of Prohibition.
There had been a lot of changes over the last 20 years, and so the passion of temperance had abated by 1933. So you wouldn't see that type of strong push for temperance after that. But that's not to say that some of the issues raised by temperance aren't still part of our Arizona political scene. The issue about whether the state should regulate personal behavior, the relationship of the United States along the border, along economic ties continues. Local option versus national option, those resonate pretty mightily in politics today. So I think that some of the issues that are raised by this temperance story, the prohibition story in Arizona, are ones that are still part of our landscape.